So greetings and welcome to today's educational program. This is part one of our 3 Vital Questions series. Where are you putting your focus? Shifting Problems to Outcomes by Anne-Marie Flinn. This is your moderator, Doug Wood, with ASQ's Quality Management Division. Now, today we have the distinct pleasure of hearing from Anne-Marie Flinn. Please join me in welcoming her. Anne-Marie Flinn is the president and founder of the Champion Foundational Change Agency, which is the gold standard in workplace excellence. A professional consultant, personal and professional development expert in organizational and human performance, Anne-Marie demonstrates a spark for storytelling and a knack for normalizing fear and adversity. Champion Foundational Change Agency has served thousands of individuals, nonprofits, and cutting-edge businesses throughout North America, tailoring impactful workshops, professional development, and customized strategies for creating a fulfilling relationship with self and profitable and productive value within the workplace. Anne-Marie's dream of expanding the potential of workplace well-being finally came to a reality when in 2018 she requested and accepted early retirement from her 29-year career at Procter & Gamble. Her faith in her life purpose provided the backbone and assurance that she would be a success. Her many credentials include Certified Workplace Wellness Ambassador, Certified 3VQ Facilitator, Professional Leadership Development and Coactive Coach, Certified Nutritional Coach, Certified Corporate Athlete Facilitator, Bachelor of Commerce graduate from Dalhousie University, and many others. A top-ranked international athlete, Atlantic Canada's first female military scuba diver, a mom, and a business owner. Anne-Marie embodies a passion for making a difference in the lives of people from all walks of life, to embrace and empower physical, mental, emotional, and intentional well-being. And so, without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce Anne-Marie Flinn. Anne-Marie, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Doug, and welcome everybody to part one of 3 talks that I will be doing in the next few weeks. And this talk, as Doug had alluded to, is going to be about driving process management culture through 3 vital questions. Now, what I've done is I've created this talk tonight and I've divided it into 3 main components. And here's how it's going to be set up. First, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about the current state of mind throughout this pandemic and people's mindsets, how the pandemic is affecting our mindsets, and how we show up internally and externally with others. Then I'll talk about the 4 stages of psychological safety. And then from there, I'll introduce you to the first of the 3 vital questions. Where are you putting your focus? Now, many of you, if not all of you, have not attended any of my talks, so you're probably not going to know this, but I tend to jam-pack a lot of information in a very short period of time. So I hope that the information that I do have here is useful and informative and improves the workplace culture and relationships. And my hope is that if you only take away one nugget of information that I have here, that it has an impact in your world and those around you. So let's get started. Let's first talk about the current state of mind in North America and around the world. So in the chat box, I just want to ask you, how many of you are feeling blurred lines right now between work and home these days? And what feelings come up for you around this? So if anybody has any comments on that.
So we're seeing anxiety.
Uh-huh.
And, never have a day off. Overwhelmed. No problems for me, someone says. They're happy. I separate work from home pretty well. I love the freedom. It's been positive for me. 1, disconnection, overwhelmed when back in the office. Another, overwhelmed. Longer work days, working constantly, overworked. Anxiousness, trying to balance, no problems. Blurry to the max. Roll out of bed to the computer for work. turn off work computer and go to the other side of the table for personal computer connectivity. Another one, as if I'm not doing enough. Longer work from home, 7 days a week. Expectation to always be available. You know, spending more time making sure my team is doing well and holding up well.
So taking care of others as well. Well, and I bet you there's probably a lot more there that, and what I'm sensing that there's definitely a connection with most of what people are saying. And here's what I want to say to you is that if you hear anything, you're going to hear a lot of similarities. And this is certainly a normal reaction to a very abnormal event. Because the global response to COVID-19 has really changed how we work and how we interact and how we learn. And many industries and organizations are undergoing unprecedented change in the era of VUCA, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. Organizations and their leaders are challenged with riding this wave with this new reality, as some people said in the chat box, about having to, make sure that everyone is, tapping into making sure that everyone is doing okay in their organization. And this can bring up a lot of discomfort and maybe even fear and anxiety, which is what we've heard in the chat box. And as I said, those are very normal responses. Now, and when these feelings are ruling our mindset, it can spark a lot of feelings, and I'm just going to call them drama. Nothing sparks stress, fear, and anxiety, or what I call drama, in an organization and within an individual quite like change, especially this kind of change. And as workplaces start to reopen and focus starts to include recovery and rebuilding, all while we're continuing to respond to outbreaks and hotspots, mental health and creating a new quote-unquote normal is really top of mind for so many of us. And there is a cost to drama. Doug, I hear a lot of typing. I'm not sure if that is you or somebody that is unmuted. So yeah, there tends to be there's a real cost to drama, and they call these soft costs. And here's what I mean. Those soft costs can include silo thinking and actions, interpersonal conflicts, decisions that are not final and rehashed multiple times, meetings before meetings, sometimes this has happened even before COVID, and avoiding healthy conversations like negative gossip. So let me give you a few stats. I come from a company that loves stats, and Nielsen was a great friend of mine. But I do want to give you a few stats on the state of mental wellness now in North America and around the world. Now, the #1 mood experience, and I don't call it a disorder, but I call it an experience right now in North America, is anxiety. And I'm going to say throughout the world. Now, this is a fear-based mindset. So think fight, flight, freeze, and even appease. And it is alive and well. And when this mindset hits the workplace, it can create conflict, resistance, disagreements, or, as I mentioned, drama. Now, 78% of people have said in the last year that the pandemic has created a significant source of stress in their life. Like, no kidding. On top of this, we have been living in a world that rewards perfectionism. And as leaders, we may think that we need to get it, quote unquote, all right, all the time. And yet we live in a very imperfect and ever-changing world, as we have noticed. So no wonder we're feeling burnt out and mental health is an issue. And here's a couple of other stats I want to bring to your attention, is that depression alone costs the U.S. over $210 billion annually. And the most common mental illness in the U.S. is anxiety, which can affect 40 million adults, or that's over 18% of the population. Now that is staggering. Now, here's something else that I found very interesting, is that before the pandemic, managers would spend up to 40% of their time managing drama. Now just imagine, with anxiety at an all-time high and stress and overwhelm, what those numbers are now. And when there is drama, it can be really difficult to create change. Now more than ever in our lifetime, is it more important for businesses to create a drama-reduced environment. Change, collaboration, trust, and resilience, and psychological safety is imperative to bounce forward in this new era. So let's talk a little bit about psychological safety, which is the next component that was on the agenda, and what it means and why it's so important, especially now. So when we experience sustained stress, levels of stress and anxiety, we are simply just trying to focus on our basic needs. So survival mode becomes extremely paramount. So many of you have probably seen this before, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And one of the things that was so interesting is that Abraham Maslow realized that people need to deal with their survival needs before they move on to any higher level of needs. So if a person is experiencing any sustained level of stress, anxiety, trauma, and if the world feels unsafe, like it does now, they are not likely to be concerned about learning new skills to qualify them for future jobs. So people whose lowest level needs have not been met may make decisions based strictly on compensation, on safety, and or stability concerns. Now here's what's interesting, is that many company mission statements, reward systems, and values have focused on the higher level needs, which is great. However, if there are triggers and hot buttons in the work environment or in the world, like COVID, it's also really important to focus on the physiological and psychological safety as well. And only when those needs are met and satisfied can the higher level needs be embraced to create a well-rounded and higher performing workplace. And that's when you get into psychological safety, which is basically the manifestation of the need for self-preservation in a social and emotional sense. And if the person doesn't feel safe in the workplace or in the world, they will again turn downward to meet their basic needs first. So the psychosocial component to wellness is really paramount when looking at a healthy, productive, and high-performing organization. So high psychological safety drives performance and innovation and a strong level of trust. And low psychological safety drives down productivity and increases turnover and absenteeism and presenteeism. So workplaces with low psychological safety and trust are more likely to have mental adversities and poor mental health. So some of you may not be familiar with what exactly is psychological safety. Well, let me give you what the definition is. It's a fairly emerging conversation that we're having here in Canada, and it is emerging in the U.S. and around the world. So here's what the definition is. It's a belief that it's 100% okay, in fact, it's expected to speak up with concerns, with questions, with ideas, and to make mistakes safely, and to also fail with safety. The vision for a psychologically healthy and safety workplace is one that actively works to prevent harm to workers' psychological health and promote psychological well-being. So I'm sure many of you have heard of physical safety in the workplace, and that took decades in the making, but now it's a pretty solid and well structured in many organizational cultures. So the next step now is to create the same culture around psychological safety. And as I mentioned, without psychological safety, you lack competitive advantage in a highly competitive market that you work in. And that means also competitive advantage of securing and retaining top talent into your workplace. And you also lack trust as well. So the question is, how do you build psychological safety in your organization? And do you see your organization in the danger loop, or do you see it in the psychological safe loop? And maybe you see it somewhere in between. And if that's the case, you're not alone. So how do you start to create psychological safety in the workplace? I could go into a full day workshop about this, but let's go into top lining here. first things first, you need to understand that there is a natural progression in building psychological and safety and trust in any relationship. And there are 4 stages to psychological safety. So it basically follows a progression based on the natural sequence of human needs, kind of like what I referred to in the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So the number 1 level of psychological safety is to feel included. Now there's that means it's the informal admittance into a team, whether it's a sports team or a work team or a group, whatever. So let's just say as a new hire, you may be accepted in a team, but it's the informal acceptance by your work colleagues that creates the psychological safety. The need to feel accepted takes priority over the need to be heard. So if any of you have kids or you've gone to school in the past, obviously, and you maybe go to a new school or you go to a new grade and you ask to sit with a group at lunch, what did it feel like if they said yes? And what did it feel like if they said no? That's the feeling of inclusion. Now, let's just assume that you have in the workplace or in any other group setting that you have secured inclusion in psychological safety. Then there is a natural progression for the next stage, and that is learner safety. And this is where the person wants to feel safe to learn, to engage in the discovery process and ask questions, experiment, and even make mistakes in a safe way. Without that feeling of safety, you might feel passive, anxious, and not want to open yourself to ridicule and judgment. So again, another example, let's just say there's a new hire or an apprentice that has come into a new team or has come into the organization, and they are learning the ropes. So if there is learner safety, they feel safe to observe and ask questions. And over time, the mentor can slowly allow the apprentice to take on more tasks, allow them to make mistakes along the way if it's safe to do so. Now, if the teacher, the mentor, the manager, or even the organizational culture has a perfectionist mindset, they would not allow the student to learn. The rules would be too rigid and they would not allow them to make mistakes. But again, for this example, let's just say that the organization, the culture, or the mentor did allow the person to learn and the person feels psychologically safe in that level. From there, they are able to move on to what's called contributor safety. So now they want to contribute. And as the individual demonstrates competence, this is the level that the contributor participates as an active, full-fledged member of the team. So an example, in the workplace, if that apprentice has shown their competence, then they are given the opportunity to contribute. If the leader is a perfectionist, is biased, or there's unconscious prejudice, and does not allow the apprentice to learn or feel included, the apprentice may not create the competence to contribute with any level of psychological safety. Well, let's just pretend that there is contributor safety, and then from there, they are able to move on to challenger safety. And then they feel safe to positively challenge the status quo without fear of being embarrassed, of being marginalized, or punished in some way, and that is passive punishment as well. LinkedIn has analyzed its massive database of more than 50,000 skills, and the #1 important soft skill is creativity. And another word for creativity is intellectual diversity. And it is instinctive for us to turn into our shell and not bring out our creativity and intellectual diversity if we feel that we will be judged, punished, or punished by speaking our truth. So again, if there is a perfectionist to do everything right in the workplace and there's no wiggle room for error or creativity, then we will not bring that challenger mindset into the workplace and psychological safety will crumble. Here's the reality. We need positive disruptors in our business, no matter what business we're in. And the only way we can disrupt is to have safety to create and to innovate. Now, the number one competitive advantage of any organization is creativity and innovation. And you won't have this if you don't allow your people to challenge the status quo and feel safe to do so. If you were to conduct a post-mortem on any organization that died or is stagnating, you can trace it back to lack of psychological safety, to challenge the status quo, and lost the ability to innovate as the world continues to evolve. So leaders or organizational cultures portray a perfectionist mindset threatens the ability of anyone getting to that challenger safety level, and it may threaten the status quo and threaten the power structure. So how do you improve psychological safety in your business to help your people to shift mindset from fear and problems to outcome and solutions? Well, first thing is first. You must first understand how your current mindset is, because that is the ripple effect on how you show up for yourself and for others, and also as leaders, the culture of the organization. How do you respond and or react to yourself and others? And this is what I call notice and name. What I recommend is, first of all, let's turn inward and discuss what is in our control to help make positive changes to psychological safety and trust. And that is in our own mindset and self-talk. And if you stop and listen, it's amazing how many voices we all have in our heads. It's part of this perplexing human experience, and sometimes it can be very confusing to know which voice to listen to. Now, there are two main voices that show up for us. One is full of drama, mistrust, which leads to low psychological safety and or a victim mindset. And the other is empowering, trusting, and full of creativity and innovation, and that is the creator mindset. And these two mindsets have a powerful ripple effect within ourselves, our relationships, and the others, even within our culture in the organization. And that's when we get into those three vital questions. So this is the third component of this talk. Without further ado, let's go through what those three vital questions are. The first question, I'm going to leave you in suspense while I have a sip. The first question is, where are you putting your focus? Are you focused on problems or are you focused on outcomes? The second question is, how are you relating to others, your experience, and how are you relating to yourself? Are you producing or perpetuating drama or empowering others and yourself to be more resourceful, resilient, and innovative? And then what actions are you taking? Are you reacting to problems of the moment or taking creative action in service to outcomes? And how will you help? So let's dive into the first of the three vital questions, and that is, where are you putting your focus? So what you focus on can be called an orientation. I like to call it a mindset. And this mindset works like a compass, one that's inside you or within a culture of a business. And it's this orientation or mindset that has a lot to do with the direction that you and or your business takes in its life. And it's the mindset that innovation and creativity can occur or where problems and drama occurs. Now, it's interesting, there's a sequence of events that happen in both the problem mindset and the outcome mindset that looks very similar in flow, yet produces very different results. So as I said, there's a basic structure of this mindset model. And this is how it starts. It all starts with a focus. What we focus on has a great deal to do with what shows up in our life. And whatever we focus on engages an emotional inner state, which can be fear and anxiety, or excitement and passion, or any other positive emotion you can think of. And that emotional inner state then drives our behavior to the outer world. Will I behave as a victim or try to rescue or persecute somebody? Or will I create from my inner state, coach and positively challenge the status quo? What's really interesting about this model is how powerfully it shows up in those two very different, or how it shows up where two people can see the exact same situation and based on their mindset may result in two very different experiences. Now, I want to give you a personal example of what I mean by that. So as Doug mentioned, many moons ago, I was a member of the military, and the job I was doing at the time was pretty mundane and unfulfilling. So one day I saw a posting for a course to become a military scuba diver, and I would be able to get away from the job that I was doing and fulfill my desire for adventure and travel. I also found out that if I signed up and completed this very intense 8-week course, I would become Atlantic Canada's very first female military scuba diver. Now that really excited me. So I had a vision to become Atlantic Canada's very first military scuba diver. So now I have a focus to become, as I mentioned, the first female military scuba diver. And that focus is now driving my inner state, which is driven, resilient, excited, pumped. And that inner state will now be the behavior that I will bring into the world, sort of like powerful, goal-oriented, feeling like I can take on anything. Now that is in the perfect world, but to throw a wrench into this story is that I'm extremely claustrophobic and I'm not a really big fan of the water. So now I have two choices of where I will put my focus. I could focus on the problem, i.e. my claustrophobia, not being a big fan of the water, or I could focus on the outcome to become Atlantic Canada's very first female military scuba diver. So again, just for this story, let's look at both scenarios and see how each would play out with this mindset model. So the scenario is, I want to sign up for this military scuba diver course, but, and the key word here is but, the problem was that I had past negative experiences of being in small places and two lovely older brothers who always sang the theme of Jaws whenever I touched a body of water that plays in my head over and over and over again. So that's the problem. So all of a sudden I have a feeling of anxiety that I'll get into the water and all those negative emotions will show up. And the feeling of fear is racing through my mind. And this anxiety is causing that fight, flight, freeze reaction. And the best thing for me to do in this situation is to not sign up and to go back to my boring, unfulfilling job and stay safe. What's here to notice is that my reaction to skip signing up for the diving course was not based on the problem. It was based on everything I said after the word but. It was decided based on the anxiety that I felt. And now this is an important distinction because this is not a problem-solving mindset. It's actually a problem-reacting mindset. So if this mindset sounds familiar to you, again, it's okay, you're not alone. It is a problem mindset that tends to be our default as human beings because we're hardwired to feel safe and secure. And the brain doesn't do a really good job of distinguishing the difference between real danger and perceived danger. So when it perceives danger, it naturally goes into this anxiety-based fight, flight, freeze, or appease mode. And that's when psychological safety is thrown out of the window. Okay, so that is the problem mindset. Now let's take a look at the outcome mindset and see what the script would look like for my story. So with the outcome mindset, I envision is to become Atlantic Canada's very first female military scuba diver. And I see myself coming home to a hero's welcome with a distinguished military scuba diver's badge proudly displayed on my uniform. And what's here to care about, so that's the outcome. What's here to care about is that I can follow my passion of travel and adventure, and I can paint the picture that I'm swimming with the dolphins and searching through sunken ships. In order to get to this desired outcome, I will certainly be faced with that nagging Jaws theme song in my head. So what I need to do is I need to chunk up this course in little bite-sized pieces and or baby steps so I can see many successes along the way, which will help me stay on track, course correct when a setback occurs, and dismiss any false education that appears real, which is the acronym FEAR. And this will build a move forward mindset that will get me closer and closer to my desired outcome of becoming the very first female military scuba diver. So you can see that there is definitely a very different thought process and level of energy in both of these mindsets. And how do you distinguish between the two? Well, there's three key distinctions or differences between the problem mindset and the outcome mindset. These two mindsets produce very different environments, or what I'll call air, and you'll see why I say that, within themselves. So in the problem mindset, our attention goes to what we don't want. It focuses on everything we say after the words, yes, but. I want to be Atlantic Canada's very first female military scuba diver, but I'm claustrophobic and I'm not a big fan of the water. It's fear-focused. But in the outcome mindset, our attention goes to what we do want. This focuses on everything we say after we say the words yes and. I'm claustrophobic, I'm not a big fan of the water, and I'm going to become Atlantic Canada's very first military scuba diver. Also in the problem mindset, our intention is to get rid of or get away from the anxiety that we feel about the problem. We want to take it out of being a reality for us. I won't sign up for the course, so I don't have to feel the anxiety of all the what ifs that's showing up for me when I'm not thinking about it. Or when I'm thinking about it, sorry. Now, in the outcome mindset, the intention is to move towards what we do want and to bring that into being. I have every intention of becoming the very first female military scuba diver. Now, you can only imagine that these two orientations and where we put our attention and intention leads to two very different results. So let's talk a little bit about the patterns of those results. So the pattern of results in each orientation looks something like this. In the problem mindset, problem occurs, anxiety goes up, so to get rid of the feeling, you react until the feeling of anxiety goes away. The problem isn't solved, it's merely reacted to. And if the problem, or what's perceived as a problem, isn't addressed, then it will just show up again and again and again. And this leads to short-term changes, low psychological safety, because people are not feeling heard and they're not able to challenge the status quo. In the outcome mindset, an outcome is focused on, and if you truly care about it, your passion is going to increase. And as your passion intensifies, all the little baby steps, like little mini successes, will be heightened. If setbacks occur, which they will, you'll see them as feedback to help with course correcting. And over time, the trend will bring you towards the outcome you've set your mind to. And people are going to be able to feel safe in a healthy and psychologically safe workplace or mindset, where they can challenge, they can create, they can make mistakes, they can course correct in a positive environment. So these results here lead to new, better breakthrough, and most importantly, sustainable change. So in summary, I went a lot faster than I thought I would be able to, is a supportive work environment reduces the prevalence, severity, and impact and duration of mental health. Furthermore, the organizations that make the effort to create a psychologically healthy workplace are much more likely to have healthier, happier employees and are likely to reap the benefits in productivity, sustainability, and growth. Now, as you probably already know, I did pass the course. I am Atlantic Canada's very first female military scuba diver, and I have to say it wasn't always easy, and yet using the words yes and was a huge breakthrough for me to be able to push through those fears and to continue to positively challenge myself in a move forward fashion. Now, on June the 16th, I'm going to be covering off question 2, and that is, how are you relating? I'm also going to talk a lot more about what's called the DDT, or the dreaded drama triangle. So you heard me talk a little bit about the victim mindset, the rescuer mindset, and the persecutor mindset. I'll talk a lot more about that and how that shows up in what they call the DDT. And I'm also going to talk about what's called the empowerment dynamic, or TED, and that is sort of the opposite feeling, the outcome-focused mindset, where you can be a creator, you can positively challenge, or you can positively coach others to empower themselves and create a culture that is sustainable and positive. I'm also going to talk about hot buttons and how to shift from the DDT to TED. So what I would encourage you all to do is that if you have questions outside of this particular talk, please feel free to reach out to me. I have a lot of programs that I work with organizations and with individuals, and they're usually customizable based on the needs of the person or of the culture. So please feel free to check out my website and also to email me if you have any questions. So I hope I didn't go too fast. I do want to thank you very, very much for your attention, and I'll open the floor up if there's any questions.
Okay, thank you. Yes, marvelous. I think your pacing was just on target. All right, so we've had a couple of different questions. You know, there's some coming in right now. I'm going to start with the first one we got from Grace. She asked us, how can we discern whether political factions are feeding the feelings of anxiety to maintain chaos at a global level? Now, this is she's talking society here, right? What do you think about that?
Yes. Well, and isn't it interesting that when we take a look at the news, what is the biggest driver of, newsworthy information? Fear, anxiety, bad news, problems, victims, and so, yes, I do agree with you that there is a level of politics and news that's perpetuating this feeling of instability and psychological unsafety.
Okay. Next question came from Orlando. It says, the specialists say we are in a BANI, B-A-N-I, brittle, anxious, not linear, and incomprehensible world. How do you deal with that? And I assume you're kind of looking at that, right?
Yeah, and I'm going to say that wouldn't it be wonderful if there was like one answer to that? That would put a lot of us out of business, to be quite honest with you. And it would put a lot of manufacturers out of business too, because what manufacturers do is that we are trying to resolve a problem. So the reality is that this world is ever changing, and evolution is alive and well, but we don't necessarily notice what is actually changing until we reflect back. And we as a species, we love certainty and we love to close the loop. And when we don't close the loop, that's when anxiety shows up. That's when uncertainty shows up. The reality is that we will not be able to close that loop fully if we want to continue evolving. And if we look back, and even just in our grandparents' time, there's a huge level of evolution that has happened with us culturally and also in the world of our industries. So I think that the real answer is how do we embrace it? How do we embrace uncertainty? How do we embrace the evolution and changes that are occurring? Because they are going to happen. So we're either going to ride the wave of it, or we're going to step back in fear and not evolve along with it.
Okay, that's a tough one to answer, and I thank you for doing that. So got another one here from Lori. She's talking about the research you mentioned in LinkedIn. She said, did the research find anything about people are kind of jumping up and down those stages of psychological safety? You had those 4 boxes diagonally across the screen.
Yeah. Not in LinkedIn that I'm aware of. There are lots of studies on it, and I think that there is a natural progression and toggling. And I think it really comes down to, again, with culture. So this is what I said to Doug a couple of days ago when we did a dry run. It's like, think about an organization like an organism, okay? And that the organization is a living, breathing, ever-evolving entity. And so when it's ever evolving, there's going to be ups and there's going to be downs, just like we as humans, right? So when it comes to psychological safety in the workplace, really the culture is the soul of the organization. And again, it's all about, we are going to be toggling, just like humans. We're not going to run a perfect shift all the time. It's that, how do we evolve? How do we have crucial conversations when there are those dips around psychological safety? So again, it's much deeper than just those 4 levels. If there is toggling between those different levels, then how do we have safe conversations so we can talk about it, so we can bring ourselves back on course, so we can course correct as we continue to move forward?
Okay, boy, a lot of questions. You really hit a mark here. Okay,
yeah.
So here's one from Tim. He says, if you focus on the positive outcomes, can you miss managing risk items and end up experiencing unintended negative consequences?
Yeah, so this isn't about putting blinders on and only seeing positives. This is about understanding that course correction will occur versus problems. It's just a different spin on the word. Course corrections will always occur. And so things are going to happen, and that's what happens with evolution of organizations, of changes, like things that are outside of our control, like a pandemic. No one saw this coming, yet there's been a ton of course correction and a huge learning curve that we've all gone through, that we will continue to, we're going to take and adopt a lot of the things that we know has worked well with this disruption in our world, and we're also going to be course correcting. So I guess the answer to your question is that it's not about putting our blinders on and only seeing things through rose-colored glasses. It's about, how do we embrace when course correction is required? How do we embrace when the unknown shows up? And how do we see that? How do we shift it from, okay, something is happening here that is something we've never experienced before. How do we ensure that we can psychologically safely talk about this so we can create opportunities for growth in this new environment?
Okay, thanks. So many questions here. We still have 10 minutes this time.
Yeah.
So Cheryl asks the question: how can we manage this mind change when we have a report that is focused in drama? Are there some tips to manage this situation?
Yeah, well, and this is again talking about the culture of the organization, right? So this is a cultural discussion versus just an individual discussion. So I always say is that sometimes change, it's like turning a destroyer in a bathtub. That things are going to happen that will take little tiny baby steps to make changes. We're not going to see this happen overnight. What you're talking about is sort of a thorn in the culture that is creating an environment that doesn't feel psychologically safe. So it's all about how does the leaders in the organization start to identify that this is not, how do we see it, how do we change it so we can see ourselves moving forward with psychological safety? So your answer is, what I'm hearing is that you're a cog in a wheel that is moving. However, that wheel is got some chips in it that need some changes. So this is where it's got to start with buy-in from the top, and there's got to be bite-sized things that need to be changed within the organization so you can start turning that destroyer around. If you're looking for an overnight action, it's probably going to take a little longer than that. But again, this is evolution, right? So we are not going to see this happen overnight. However, if we can see this as an opportunity for growth, then we can start taking action and move forward in that direction.
Thank you. I think you may have answered Lisa's question on that one as well. She asked for, how can you help someone get out of the fear area and into the improvement area? She's been challenged with that. I think that answer does apply there, doesn't it?
Yeah, and again, I'm assuming she's talking about in a work environment. And again, if I was to look back as an organization like an organism, if there's a cancer in a cell within an organism, then there's risk of that organism being healthy. It's the same thing with an organization. If there is an unhealthy team, or if there's an unhealthy person or an unhealthy policy within the organization, then it creates an overall negative effect on the organization. So the reality is that, again, it really comes down to having this conversation at the highest levels to start getting buy-in, to start chipping away at what can be done to improve the psychological safety of their people so they feel like they don't need to start looking at other places. They can be able to positively challenge the status quo. And maybe this is an opportunity to challenge the status quo. But again, this is something that will happen when there's buy-in, and it's going to happen gradually over time, depending on the organization.
Okay, so part of what you're saying is that when you're in this downward spiral, to reverse it takes concerted effort and repetitious work and time.
Absolutely. And so think of it this way from a very simplistic thought process, is that how many of us have, or how many times do we see on television, it's like, take this 12-week diet and you're going to lose 40 pounds, right? And it's like, okay, great, go on an egg white diet and lose 40 pounds, and then what? And the thing is that when it comes to shifting mindset and shifting culture, it's about creating sustainable change that will last over the long run. So these one and dones, lunch and learns, check the the box off and all this sort of stuff is not going to change culture. Culture is much more complex than that, and it really comes down to how do you learn a new language within the organization. And that takes time. I'm not going to ask any of you to, in 2 weeks, I'm going to give you a lunch and learn, and all I want you to do is become proficient in Mandarin when we're done. Because it sounds ludicrous, right? However, if I said, we're going to learn one word in Mandarin, and let's just practice that, and let's just play with that, and let's get curious with it, and let's start, thinking about how we can incorporate that one word into our life. Then from there, you learn another word, and all of a sudden, maybe you're learning a sentence. So this is how culture changes as well within organizations.
Okay, that's very well put. Okay, I've got one here that talks about organization or individual. Chris asked the question, who is responsible for psychological safety in an organization? Is there individual responsibility or management responsibility? How do you see that?
it's everyone's responsibility, and this is where we need to take the bull by the horn and start shifting culture on our own. We cannot keep waiting for someone else to do it. And again, it all comes down to is that what is the environment that you want to be in, that you and that you want to embrace and empower yourself to create. If we keep waiting for everybody else, it's going to take a long time for it to happen. So there's a lot of things that are within our control, and there's a lot of things that we can do to influence, and there's a lot of things that we can do to help decision makers create that positive environment. So I've always been very adamant in saying, like, don't wait for somebody else to take the bull by the horn. We need to start having the conversation now.
Okay. So perhaps there's so many good questions, but perhaps this one might be a good one to close on. So when does a person make the decision to move on into looking for greener pastures, or to stay and try to change from within the organization?
Yeah, well, and that's a really, really good question. And I've done a lot of work with executives and when I coach, and we really get into value discussions and talking about our values. And really it comes down to your values and what is really top of mind when it comes to thriving in your world. So, oh, can you hear me okay? Okay.
Yes, you're still good.
Okay, sorry. So anyway, it really comes down to talking about your values, figuring out what your values are, and then cross-referencing, do these fit into my values? So all answers come back to your own personal values. And if they don't fit your values, then you know the answer.
Okay, thank you. At this point, we're going to do some closing items and finish things off. All right.
Okay.
I wanted everybody